159. Oh, damn, my phone was at 100%. This TikTok definitely knows how to drain the battery. Joe, I want to apologize for forgetting to add accessibility to in my video. Oh.
Hey, Dragon Ball, thank you. A lot of people forget it's DEIA, and I'm constantly in the comments going DEI space A. Accessibility is important, and we need to stop forgetting about accessibility. But I get you. I figured you didn't mean to do it. That's why I just said something instead of being like rah rah rah.
All right, so we are on page 159, and I'm gonna go back just a bit, probably 2 paragraphs back, because I think we're talking of fascism in Latin America, and we stopped there. The 2 factors must be seriously considered when analyzing the 2 largest fascist states in Latin America, Brazil and Argentina. Their dependence on foreign trade and their neo-colonial status, which involves dependence on foreign investment, quote unquote. Their exports fall as they did during the Depression of the 30s. The value of the national currency must also fall, and it follows that imports automatically decrease. The battle.
I can't find that on page 159. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find where we're at.
I went back a couple paragraphs.
Okay, where'd you go back to?
Page 158, second paragraph. The battle to balance.
I'll try to find it.
The battle to balance payment begins necessitating mass governmental intervention, which leads inexorably, oh my gosh.
Inexorably?
Yes, inexorably to inflationary domestic economic policies, and sometimes to a conflict of interest with the ruling class of the parent nation. Concern for balance of payments determines internal economic motives. The deficit financing and attempts to control incomes by controlling labor, price fixing, government stockpile of agricultural surpluses, positive directions of investment, and the balancing of the interests of the dualistic economy's elites can all be pointed to as evidence of a attempt to employ the centralist controls that characterize the classic fascist arrangement. The first fascist regime of Brazil was headed by Vargas, and it lasted from 1930 to 1945. Coffee export and GNP, gross national product, prior to Vargas taking over and the Depression. When international trade, especially in agricultural goods, collapsed, Vargas was forced to attempt experiments with the so-called closed economy. New internal markets had to be created, investments and motives relocated, industrialization attempted, but all of this planning, though successfully to an extent, was still basically imitative and did not accurately reflect the realities of the nation's inability to accumulate capital. Now we're on to the other part. I will bring you up, yes, but I don't know if you're going to get too much coins, though. I don't know if you're going to get too many coins, though, but we'll try. We will try. It is extremely important not to confuse the three phases of fascism when studying Latin America. The second phase, in power but not secure, is the really significant part of the whole fascist episode. Regime after regime has failed to increase internal demands or unseat the traditionalist landed elite in favor for small industrial interests. This means a permanent dependence on foreign trade and investment for medicine tools, for weapons to control the people's movements, and for raw materials to feed their light industries and flea markets. Consequently, we see these areas as the most glaring dichotomy of social economic injustice. In the shadow of their plush beach resorts, which attract degenerates from all over the Western world, literally within rifle shot, live the people who serve these vacation resorts, complexes, and diseased, infested, congruented tin shanties on the hillside, constantly ravaged with mudslides. A strange combination of the first two phases of fascism. Without the massive military aid of the United States Gestapo, quote, death squads, end quote, and the most intensive rightist terror, the guns of liberation would by now have certainly filled the streets and forests with blood, quote, to the horse's brow, end quote. It is important never to lose sight of Latin America's neo-colonial status. A victory for the People's Liberation Armies entail a victory over international capitalism, and especially a victory over their colonial masters. The puppet regimes of these areas cannot move firmly into phase 3 of the fascist arrangement for two reasons. The people are willing to use arms and are learning to use them more effectively, and because the regimes are imitative, not indigenous, they do not reflect the real interests of the nation's elites, but rather the interests of the ruling elites of the parent imperial nations of the USA. Germany attempted to rearm, deflate its currency, and at the same time continue to meet the war-swollen demands of heavy industry. It finally fell to its own weight. The fascist economic arrangement failed under the pressures of war in Germany, in Austria, in Italy, and Japan. As later it failed the first regimes of Brazil and Argentina. The principal failing was very much the same that brought down laissez-faire. The capitalist business cycle cannot be controlled. Inflationary inflationary. Is that right? Is that right? I'll go look at it. Hey, Aziz.
We need to look that one up.
Let me look at that. I think it's inflationary.
I think it's inflationary.
Probably.
I believe for
Yep, everybody, if you can help, please.
Inflationary.
It's inflationary. A characteristics by a trend to cause momentary inflation. Yeah, we looked at this. Inflationary, spasmodic attacks, regional recession, and depression pursued capitalism in all its form, like the nemesis, breaking its spirit, reducing its top-heavy bureaucratic backbone to jelly. Inflation, at first, the key to regeneration after an extended collapse, ultimately leads to complex problems that seems to be beyond regulatory remedy. To control it by compressing wage demands always turns out to be politically unsound. Class consciousness in Germany was better developed than in any other European nations before and after the fascist takeover. So consciousness, quote, alone is obviously not the factor that determines which way a disintegrating society will develop, fascism or socialism. The task of diffusing the people's labor movement and balancing it in favor of the few special individual heavy industrial firms. Oh my gosh, here we go. Rechwerk, Harriman, Gora, Krupp, and I think that is German, and the vital interests of the increasingly important chemical industry, IG, Farben, etc., failed to the regime's sponsored labor front. Its first attempt to appease labor came in the form of slightly improved working conditions, meaningless slogans like "strengthen our joy," "strengthen through joy," quote unquote, which echoed the Anglo-American work ethic. Even after the foreseeable, is that foreseeable? I think it's foreseeable.
Forcible.
Yeah, the forcible suppression of the Vanguard Party by the Gestapo in the first years of the regime, the potential political power of labor due to the workers' importance in the production of heavy armaments. As such, that really effective measure of control, it were not decisive
For
through
controlling it.
it were not decisive throughout the tenure of the Third Reich. Wage increases cannot be avoided. Rigorous state control replaced mild repression and propaganda only after the student land affair of 1938 and the accentuated armaments drive of 1939. Because wages could not be successfully held down, the individual firms were after profits. Bear in mind, consequently, they devised many direct incentives designed to attract a shrinking labor market. Measures were taken to limit the movement of laborers from place to place, and the other factors of production were openly channeled into an armament sector by stringent government intervention. All ideological pretense were dropped. Racism and the interest of the military-industrial complex formed the economic and psychosocial motives of the society that shook it apart. The German economy was already in ruin by the time the Reich expanded into Russia. This expansion itself was a symptom of the economy's death-directed lack of discipline. Its one internal contradiction and deceit destroyed it. An industrial military-based economy must expand to live, must forcibly balance trade in its favor to survive. No amount of logic or dissent can influence the men who have vested interest in the life of such an arrangement. Only organized violence and armed struggle could have stopped them before they lost their minds. That's not good. And destroyed so many lives. The counterterrorism of the Socialist Party, Vanguard, and the proper direction of the people's consciousness could have changed the whole course of history over the last 50 years. Once fascism moves into its third phase of contra-positive mobilization, the psychosocial antithesis of lower class mobilization insinuates itself technologically with weapons and controls of the means of the people's subsistence, limiting their vision to their own personal short-term interests with propaganda and empty promises. Wonder if that happens here in the United States continually. Only he who does not fear death of 1,000 cuts, quote unquote, can then unseat the Führer. The United States was not existing in a vacuum when fascism first swept the Western world on the heels of two Great Depressions. My reading of history indicates that the U.S. was in greater economic, social, and political crisis after the 1929 stock market crash than any other Western country, excepting possibly Germany. The same trends, the same experiments, the same internal battles were fought by the same forces for the direction of the national economy. The extreme economic crisis of the early 30s brought working class revolutionary consciousness to its very peak. Interesting. All serious commentaries on this period reflects a profound lack of confidence in the workability of capitalism. This avalanche of criticism came from sectors of the middle and right-oriented thinkers as well as left, just as it did in Italy, Germany, Romania. Is that Romania or is that Romania? Is that Romania?
It's like Romania, but it's spelled different.
Let me find out.
I don't know. Because otherwise it would be Romania.
It's a Romanian country in Europe.
Okay.
It's just that they spell it with O. Huh. I wonder if it's just like a. Huh. Hold on, let me see if I can get it to say it for me. I don't know if I can. Yeah, they change it to okay. So it's gotta be, I don't know. And other fascist storm centers. But of course, the middle and rightist intellectuals were thinking in terms of the new direction for capitalist growth, not in its abolishment, a quote New Deal. Much like those Nazi fascists and phalangists, Europe. Phalangists. What is a phalangist? What is this?
Phalangist.
Oh, it's phalangist. Relating to or characteristics of a Spanish phalange movement. Okay, thanks. A member of the Spanish phalange movement. Okay. No serious or honest students could miss the likeness. FDR was a fascist. He stated, documented, congratulatory messages to Mussolini were not simply diplomatic gestures. Joseph Kennedy's advice to England to surrender to German expansions did not necessarily originate in Kennedy's mind. He was officially ambassador of the U.S. to England. There was positive mobilization of the workers and the lower class and the highly developed class consciousness. There was indeed a very deep economic crisis with attendant strikes, unionizing, lockouts, break-ins, call-outs of the National Guard. The lower class was threatening to unite under the pressures of economic disintegration. Revolution was in the air. Socialist vanguard parties were leading it. There was terrorism from the right, from groups such as the Guardians of the Republic, the Black Legion, Peg Leg, white-type stormtroopers, of hired assassins who carried out the beginnings of the contrapositive suppressive mobilization under the threat of revolution. The ruling class, true to Marxian theory, became all the more co-optive and dangerous. FDR was born and bred in this ruling class of families. His role was to form the first fascist regime to merge the economic, political, and labor elites, governing elites / corporative state / fascism. His role was to limit competition, place it with the dream of corporation, to put laissez-faire to rest and initiate the acceptance of government intervention into economic affairs. A great many of the early trends of American history prepares the way for the ultimate success of fascism in its highest form. From the very beginning of America's existence as the independent nation state, where there were localized labor organizations that attempted to further the interests of their class by influencing the social, political, and economic life of the new nation. It wasn't until the second half of the 19th century that labor took on a national character and began to make its presence felt in the economic life of the nation. Even then, it was resisted by the violence of employers and government working together. Marx's definition of history as a broken, twisted, sordid spectrum of class struggles is substantiated by American labor history. The earliest significant struggles between labor and capital began in the 1790s on the East Coast in the cities like New York, Philadelphia, and Baltimore, where mutual aid craft societies attempted to gain higher wages and shorter work hours. Resistance from employers and their backers in the government to these mild organizational efforts forced the establishment of the first trade unions, the Philadelphia Printers Union, the New York Typographical Union of 1797, journeyman cabinets and chair makers in 1796. The first wage strike was organized by the Society of Journeymen Cordwainers, Shoemakers of Philadelphia. It lasted 10 or 11 weeks in 1799 and was broken by White Ring terrorist activities. The laying to rest of laissez-faire, the shackling of Adam Smith's, quote, invisible hand, end quote, really began during the Civil War in the U.S. The petite bourgeoisie dreamed of countless contending private proprietorships, somehow managed a maleficent, is it malicious, maleficent,
Mellifluous.
Mellifluous. What is mellifluous?
Mellifluous. There's an L in there.
I said mellifluous. Let's find out.
I wasn't sure I said it.
Mellifluous.
Mellifluous. A voice or words, sweet or musical. Oh my gosh, stop. Okay, great. Close out. Pleasant to hear. Okay. Somehow manage a mellifluous blending of private and state interest when long-range plans could still be made by wage workers to the proprietors one day became a nightmare with the advent of the mass manufacturing process. At the opening of the Civil War, the U.S. was ranked fourth among the world's industrial states behind the English Empire, the German state, and France. By 1870, the U.S. industrial manufacturing plant had doubled the value of its products. The number of factory workers drawn out of other sectors of the economy caused the industrial workforce to nearly double during this same period. Improvements in the arts of agriculture production drew some workers from the countryside and sent others westward towards the closing frontier. The craftsman lost his privileged economic position with the appearance of newly invented mass production machineries. This new machinery and the factory setup in general made individual workers more expendable and made it impossible to reduce their share of the profit. By the mid-1890s, the U.S. was producing 1/3 of the world's manufacturing goods and was on its way to becoming first among the world's industrial states. The expansion of U.S. industries out of the demands of a civil war involved a complex concentration of several violent and predictable capital mandates. The old traditional sectors of the landed aristocracy was broken. Machine tools, transports, and communication boomed, the basis of the industrial state, and of course the industrial elite, when raw materials, coal, iron, and other ores are not lacking. The price or value of labor shrank, and the drive, quote unquote, towards monopoly accumulation was firmly established. This period of capital accumulation, invention of new machinery, its use of in expanding factory setups, the quote closed economy, end quote, created by Republican government legislation, and the direction of certain amounts of capital through government contracts were in part the beginning of a new chapter in the authoritarian process of the world of Western history. In industrial centralization, I mean the refined tactics of monopolized capitalism may have been developed right here in the US. It is the logical place to question some of the old left's historical assumptions about the last 100 years of life. Analysts of the old left are completely confused by the difference between bourgeois democracy and monopoly capital and their manifestations on the American scene. They seem to feel that both can coexist in the same society. Actually, one simply grows out of the other, kind of a negation. Monopoly capital is the central objective of corporative fascism. Prior to the Civil War, the emergence of the trends towards monopoly capital, America was dominated by bourgeoisie, democratic economics, and political rule. The economy was based upon the diverse ownership of many thousands of factory units and the political arrangement to reflect the fact, because they needed the policies of the government in order to do these things. However, with the emergence of the expansions of monopoly capital after the economic impetus of the Civil War, bourgeoisie democracy naturally began to fade. Bourgeoisie democracy, the political rule of the bourgeoisie, simply cannot exist after the emergence of monopoly capital. Monopoly capital has its own political expression. It develops as bourgeoisie democratic political rules declines. The roots of corporatism fascism were laid with the expansion of monopoly capital into the giant cartels, corporations, and interlocking trusts. The owners of the largest share of the national gross net product, I think, GNP, will always control the political life and government of the state. Monopoly capital is corporatism, fascism. I don't think anything that ever happened in Italy, Spain, Germany, or any of the other capitalist states can match the centralizing process that the US went through in the last 100 years. Even the so-called public utilities, AT&T, the Santa Fe, the Pennsylvania R&R, Western Electric, Western Union are owned by financial institutions that, on examination, always turns out to be controlled by the few families who are descendants of the industrial expansionists of 1865 to 95. The traditional Anglo-Saxon concept of law founded on the latent principle that the haves must always be protected from the have-nots. Though it did not attack labor as openly as in England, effectively prohibited the emergency of any really strong labor movement until the close of the 19th century. It did not prevent the war profiteering, Rockefellers, petroleum combinations from forming. It did not stop Western Union from taking over the telegraph industry. It did not stop Samuel Slatter and the Boston Associates, quote unquote, for tying up all the New England textile interest. The Transcontinental Railroad hookup, May 19th, 1969, Pacific Union Pacific and Central Pacific, could have never been accomplished without government and commercial corporations. Corruption and lawlessness were the basis of their commercial success, but no one was charged. No one was charged or punished by law. Any individuals, on the other hand, who joined with someone else to effect an increase in his wage was guilty of conspiracy. The same law is still used to protect the same interests today. Anglo-Saxon law supported F.B. Goodwin of the Philadelphia and the Reading Railroad and its coal subsidy, in cutting wages and breaking unions, just as it supported the KKK and reconstructing southeastern U.S. King of the Baltimore and Ohio, Tom Scott of Pennsylvania, William Vanderbilt of the New York Central. Every time I hear the word, quote, law, I visualize gangs of militant men and Pinkertons busting strikes, pigs wearing sheets and caps that fit over their pointed heads. I see a white oak and a barefoot black person hanging, or snake eyes peeping down the lens of a telescope rifle, or conspiracy trials. All right. Now, I don't know. I think this is... Yeah, okay. I don't know what this is. Let me read this.
It's The Mass Psychology of Fascism by W. Wright. It's at the end.
Okay, good. So it goes by 1 through 7. So 1, mankind is biologically sick. 2, politics is a irrational expression of the sickness. 3, whatever takes place in social life is actively or passively, voluntarily or involuntarily determined by the structure of the masses of the people. 4, this character structure is formed by social economic processes, and it anchors and perpetuates these processes. Man's biopathic character structure is, as it were, the fossilization of the authoritarian process of history. It is the biophysical reproduction of mass suppression. 5, the human structure is animated by the contradictions between a tense longing for and a fear wait, where was I? Hold on a second. And a fear from freedom. I know I lost my place. 6, a fear of freedom of masses, of the people, to express in the biophysical rigidity of an organism and an inflexibility of the character. 7, even from the social leadership is merely a social
Reform.
Thank you. Merely the social expression of the one or the other side of this structure of masses of people. So that was by what you just said, mass psychological of fascism. Okay. So it's mass psychology of fascism. All right. Revolutionary change always involves a complete alteration of the structures of property relations and the institutional substructures that support them. It leads from hierarchies to mass society. The ruling class in the U.S. is composed of 1 million men and their families. The Rockefeller, Vanderbilts, Morgans, Mellons, DuPonts, Hunt and Gettys, Fords and their minions of dependents. They use the Ivy League universities and elite law schools as private schools for their offsprings and as training grounds for their corporate hirelings. They rule with an iron precision through the military, the CIA, the FBI, private foundations, and financial institutions. Their control of all the media, of education and communication comprise of extremely effective systems of thought control. At the time when these ruling class was formed 100 years ago, the International Workmen's Party supported strikes that asked only for reformist measures, although it was aware, even at the time, that reform was not the solution, and it quite quietly advocated the seizure of the materials of production. The dichotomy between the longing for true freedom and the fear of its responsibility was apparent even then. Early radicals excused themselves by claiming that they were, quote, exploiting the inherent contradictions of monopoly capital, end quote. They hoped that the masses would spontaneously awaken to the fact that capitalism has grown decadent. But capitalism reform itself apologized to no one and went on to build a network of national and international centralization that stands unrivaled by any hierarchy, past or present. Reformism is an old story in America. There have been depressions and social, economic, political crisis throughout the period that marked the formation of the present upper class ruling circles and their controlling elites. But the parties of the left were too committed to reformism to exploit their revolutionary potential. The latest round of capitalism reform, the latest redirection of its energy, was its highest and last form. The struggles of the 30s, 40s, and 50s completed the totalitarianization, of the country and perfected the systems of total mass social depression. Depression. I've had learned men tell me that controlled capitalism, monopoly capital, fascism, corporatism, or whatever your vernacular, is a form of, quote, welfare statism, end quote. This is precisely what we are intended to believe, that the political takeover by monopoly capital was actually an advance in the welfare of the common people. Even the old left promotes the lie that valid concession have been made by the ruling class as a decrepitly better working conditions and illusory wage increases were Marxism. A true Marxist revolution abolishes the wage system. The true welfare state would be the final and highest stage of social development, where the world and the state are one, where the material of psychological needs of the masses have been met and political regimes have ceased to exist. The New Deal and the resulting military-industrial complex was welfare statism. I swear, I swear I'll strangle the next unintelligent person who repeats that line. All the ingredients for a fascist state were already present. Racism, the morbid traditional fear of black people, indigenous, Mexican people, and the desire to inflict pain on them when they begin to compete in industrial sectors. The resentment and the seedbed of fear is patterned into every modern capitalist society. It grows out of the sense of insecurity and insignificance that is inculcated into the workers by the condition of life and work under capitalism. This sense of vulnerability is the breeding ground of racism. At the same time, the ruling class effectively promotes racism against black people of the lower classes. This programmed racism has already served to distract the huge numbers of people who subsist at just a slightly higher level than those in the more debased conditions. In the 1870s, the strikes frequently ended in anti-Chinese or anti-black lynchings. It conforms to dual requirements of the authoritarian personality: conformity accompanied by compulsive sadism. Racism has served always in the U.S. as a pressure release or a psychopathic destructiveness invested in what? Invest in
Evinced.
I don't know that word.
Okay, it's evinced.
Evinced. Oh my gosh, it did a space when I didn't ask for it to do a space. I hate it when it does that. Evinced. Reveal the pressure of an quality or feeling. Okay. Evinced by the people, made fearful and insecure by a way of life they never understood and resented from the day of their birth. In the US, World War II was a principal cause of the total breakdown of the working class movement and its revolutionary consciousness, which had been built up by the crisis years of the 30s and all that went before them. Lesser attempts at suppression had been made prior to the war through the typical reformist policies of modern fascist regimes. The economy had been closed, banks regulated, deficit spending has been practiced on projects like TVA and CCC. The arms race that eventually culminated in the fascist military-industrial complex-based economy broke the closed economic deals. Two conditions distinguished the successful establishment of fascism in this country. The old vanguard parties copped out and supported the nation-state ruling class war, which wasted the blood and energy of their proletarians. At the time, resistance to the war would have seemed like a simple common sense. If Stalin gave the order to support the U.S. war efforts, he was a fool. In any case, the old vanguard support should have been for the people's struggle inside the U.S. With a little more patience and sacrifice, Stalin could have eventually marched to the Atlantic, with all of Europe in ruins, and the German economy already in its final stages of disintegration. With the U.S. presence in Europe, capitalism could be dead today. Instead, U.S. imperialism rose to the behemoth proportions. After the war, international markets opened in Europe, Africa, and Asia, with the flea market of radios, TVs, novelties here at the centers. For the sake of these trinkets and bubbles.
Bubble. It means things.
Yeah. The labor elites diffused the righteous demands of the people. Census, conscience politics, consensus politics formed as a result of their defection simply solidified the totalitarian regime, with all the opinions molding facilities under the ruling classes. elections and political parties have no significance when all serious contenders for public office are fascists and the electorate is thoroughly misled about the true nature of the candidates. One cannot say all the people who vote are unaware, just as one cannot say that 1,200 professors who backed Mussolini were all frightened. Those who are aware and still do nothing constructive are among the most pathetic victims of a totalitarian process. The necessary shock troops, the tools for creating the false contra-positive psychosocial basis of the fascist type pseudo-society were in short supply in this country prior and during the process of the fascist takeover. There was little of this consciousness among the middle classes, so the first terror came from the especially formed and hired goons of the DuPonts and Rockefellers, the Black Legion, the Guardians of the Republic, the FBI. They destroyed the already disintegrating vanguard, leaving the disintegrated elements of the working class of the working class as the only available mass. Class relations were slowly altered as a result of this action by the co-op labor sectors. He's like calling this all out. Government agents were sent to infiltrate scattered labor movements. The disguise was complete. The disguise was complete. The satisfaction of labor's short-term economic interest was made possible by the giant consumer markets and the military complex. They say a little bit of this in what's up? What page? 174. They said they mentioned this also in Settlers. Settlers, they mentioned this. Jay Shakai is mentioning the same thing on how these things were saturated and taken over by settlerism. Ties were formed between rulers and the labor leaders. The elites of the proletarian movement were compromised. A ruling class and its governing elites were centralized and were carefully co-optive. The fascist arrangement, death and prison for all who object fascism in its final and secure state. It has happened here. And the only recourse is an appeal to arms. The corporative state allows for no genuinely free political opposition. They only allow meaningless gatherings where they can plant more spies than participants. Let's read that again. The corporative state allows for no genuinely free political position. They only allow meaningless gatherings where they can plant more spies than participants. I wonder if that's what happens. Beep, beep. They feel secure in their ability to mold the opinions of the people's interests only in wages. However, real revolutionary activities will draw pain-stricken gunfire or heart attacks. So, what is to be done after a revolution has failed? After our enemies have created a conservative mass society based on the meaningless electoral politics, spectator sports, and a 3% annual raise in purchasing power strictly regulated to negate itself with the corresponding rise of the cost of living. Raise the wages, raise the cost of living. The wages mean shit. Because they're going to get their shit through the cost of living.
Right, and they raise the cost of living higher than they raise the wages.
Yeah, that's what he says in here. Yeah, you're correct. What is to be done about this expertly, scientifically calculated contra-positive mobilization of the entire society? What can we do with a people who have gone through the authoritarian process and come out sick to the core. There will be a fight. The fight will take place in the central cities, the town centers. That's the thing. Because even if, as a Maoist, we also know that it doesn't start from the countryside anymore. It's going to start from the town centers. Because this is a highly developed capitalist society. But if we don't watch it, it is doing disenfranchisement of the workers through automation. So we're going to be deproletarianized, I fear. And it's going to cause for stricter and sharper contradictions and for more people to go out and want to fight for this. It will be spearheaded by black people of the lower class and their vanguard party, the Black Panther Party. Real union activity will eliminate the corporative ties between the regime, ruling class, and labor. People at the top will be removed, and the guy with the program mind will have no union boss to think for him. He will remain neutral or join us in our fight to liberate him. We will work this attack at the productive levels indirectly by first building our central city communes, which will revolutionize the all too conservative black laborer. We will build the communes against all resistance. The pamphlet in one hand, the gun in the other. In black people's authoritarian traits are mainly the effects of terrorism and the lack of intellectual stimulation. They have been chosen the least dangerous and complicated mode of existence, survival. All classes, all people are subject to the authoritarian syndrome. And it requires only the proper set of sociological, circumstantial pressures to turn black people around and reawaken their revolutionary consciousness. We are hungry. Our overall task is to separate the people from the hated state. They must be made to realize that the interests of the state and the ruling class are one and the same. They must be taught to realize that the present political regime exists only to balance the productive forces within the society in favor of the ruling class. It is at the ruling class and the governing elites, including those of labor, and that we must aim our bolts. The average working man will simply withdraw or watch with secret satisfaction or actively join in when we bring his union boss under attack. Black people have lived with terrorism for generations. It no longer affects us. It will intensify. We must prepare a counterterrorism. A man can never be repressed that he cannot strike back in some way, but it must begin now. The Rand Corporations does 80% of its work for the military-industrial intelligence complex. 750 or more colleagues offer police science courses. 274 additional colleges offer associate's degrees in law enforcement. 44 officer bachelor degrees. The National Guard numbers 390,000, which is probably more now. The CIA, got it. Counterintelligence Analysis Detachment. Sorry, I got it. I flipped it. The 113th Military Intelligence Group is designed for surveillance of private citizens. The police state isn't coming, it's here, glaring and threatening. How do we raise a new revolutionary consciousness against the system programmed against our old methods? Revolution against the law. Revolution is against the law. It will not be allowed not one significant form. That makes the true revolutionary an outlaw, and the black revolutionary a doomed man. As black people, we must function, not me, them. We must function as a vanguard in any hostilities. We must use the new approach, unite and revolutionize the black central city communes, and slowly provide the people with the incentives to fight by allowing them to create programs that will meet all of their social, political, and economic needs. Thank you. I appreciate it. We must fill the vacuums left by the established order. We must push the settlers off our land when they want cooperate with the new communal life of our system. We must learn from the people. We must learn from the workers, the discipline they are so highly skilled in. In return, we must teach them the benefits of our revolutionary ideals. We must move black people to the forefront of the really productive assault on the outside enemy reactionary culture, not only on the production level, but in all significant areas of property relations. Black people, this is all for black. This is what he's saying to black people. We must promote a support, enforce rent strikes. Merchants must come over to our side or face appropriation of their property for the commune. We must build a subsistent economy and a social political infrastructure so that we can become an example for all revolutionary people. Dual power. Fascism has established itself in the most disguised and efficient manner in this country. It feels so secure that the leaders allow us the luxury of faint protest. Take protest too far, however, and they will show their other face. Doors will be kicked down in the night, and machine gun fire and buckshots will become the medium of exchange. I am an extremist, a communist, not communistic, not a communist. I must be destroyed, or I will join my comrades in the only communist party in this country, the Black Panther Party. And this is when the Black Panthers were there. Yeah. I will give them all, even dirty fighting tricks in the annals of war. Nothing will defeat our revenge, and nothing will countervail our march to victory. We come to our conclusion. The only historical recourse that is left to us, freedom, means warmth and protection against harsh exposures to the elements. It means food, not garbage. It means truth, harmony, and social relations that spring from these. It means the best medical attention whenever it's needed. It means employment that is reasonable, that coincides with the individual necessities and feelings. We will have this freedom even at the cost of total war. All right, we got a half hour. Let's see what we got here. Let me look at this. Getting close to the end. Let's see what happens. All right. Dear John Garassi, Gerassi. As we know, I am in a unique political position. I have a very nearly closed future, and since I have always been inclined to get disturbed over organized injustice or terrorist practice against the innocents, wherever I can now say just about what I want. I've always done just about that without fear of self-exposure. I can only be executed once. No matter what I do, they will always explain me away with the fact that even 11 years in prison and my supposed loss of contact with objective reality. So I rage. So I rage on aggressive and free the actions on April 6th. When I am denied or corrected, I always understand but rage on. All all on the principle that the ideal must be demonstrated, that the oppressed mentality, right? Yeah, mentality must be taught by example to escape the myth and hoax that repression can work against the collective consciousness of the commune, and to prove that ideals cannot be killed with violence. So I'm duty bound to take the occasion of your letter to respond with what an Irishman once termed, quote, the sweet taste of sedition, end quote. I will go straight back to our visit and the hour they allow us to deal with all the years. I took our casual remarks concerning, quote, the outlaw, end quote, back to the cell with me, tooled with it a bit and clarified it in my own hand. I have 100 related questions. I am alive and learning. Outlaws, of course, I thought revolution will not be tolerated. It is against the law in the totalitarian corporative state. The revolutionary must certainly reconcile himself with one day becoming an outlaw. Then my thoughts turn to the oppressive contract in general. It is the nature of cancer to expand. We've seen a great deal of it firsthand. U.S. expansionism since World War II. I've only studied it vicariously, but we see the same conclusion. Millions of outlaws in the Union of the South Africa, Jordan, Indochina, and here. Summary executions, not of uninformed soldiers, but ordinary people. First women and children in the ditch.
Uniformed soldiers, but ordinary people.
Thank you. First women and children in the ditch of Vietnam. Ultimately, executions in the civic centers of every look-alike country in this county in this country. Sorry. And that's the principal contradiction of monopoly capital, oppressive contracts. The system produces outlaws. It also breeds contempt for the oppressed. Accrual of contempt, it is fundamental survival technique. This leads to the excessive and destroys any hope of peace eventually being worked out between the two antagonistic classes, the haves and the have-nots. Coexistence is impossible. Contempt breeds resistance, and resistance breeds brutality. The whole growing in spirals that must either end in an uneconomic destruction of the oppressed or the determination of the oppression. History is clearly a long continuum of synthesizing elements, the imbalances of the oppressive contract, ideals so fundamentally contradictory, and forces so mutually exclusive can only result in the dissolution of agents of that contradiction. The corollary of the contract is quite simple. Oh my gosh, I can't say that. Malignancy. It strikes first of all regions of the brain. Its search for non-diseased minds throws one hard against one of the greatest historical biological calamities imaginable. Excuses can be made for some workers. build defense for the system that is victimizing them.
Blind defense for the system.
Thank you. Brainwashed by the National Advertising Council's portrait of the silent majority as well off in comparison to the barbarian world. Their mindless behavior can also be explained by their ignorance of labor history, but even the nationalistic condition received in massive doses from birth cannot completely explain why man would turn against himself. Even the workers' short-term economic advantages is only a partial explanation. We must look for root causes in the psychosocial effect of competitiveness and racism. A huge mass of blue-collar workers seem to be working totally against themselves in their support of the system owned and controlled by a tiny majority. Actually, their contradictory behavior is explained by feelings of loyalty to race, by their identification with the white hierarchies, and by their economic advantages over the oppressed races. They may be oppressed themselves, but in return, they are allowed to oppress millions of others. The economic nature of racism is not simply an aside. Built-in physical features exclude black people from participation, excludes them forever. These features cannot be changed. It is the relationship that must change. Racism is a fundamental characteristic of monopoly capital. When the white self-congratulatory racist complains that black people are uncouth, unlettered, that our areas are run down, not maintained, that we dress with loud tastelessness, a thing they now also say about their own children, we forget that he governs. He forgets that he built the schools that are inadequate, that he has abused his responsibility to use taxes to paid by black people to improve their living conditions, that he manufactured the loud pants and pointed shoes that destroyed and deformed the feet. If we are not enough like him to suit his taste, it's because he planned it that way. We were never intended to be part of his world. It is a silly contradiction for him or us to dwell on the subject of comparisons between the enemy capture culture and its creation, the subculture. The only way the exploiters can maintain his position is to create differences and maintain deformities. It is the sense of a finality of their expulsion from solid socioeconomic participation that forces our youth away from the crippling. What did I say besides crippled family?
Well, you should have said that. It forces our youth away from the broken family unit into the streets.
From the broken family units into the streets. It causes the excessive importance of meaningless relationships and the prevalence of anti-communal behavior, which is a psychosocial response to the loss of and longing for community. The diseased mind, it slowly spreads throughout the oppressive organism, even the magnificent, quote, S word. The mindless overman is dying from the most total anemia. Where is the black man? I see him inseparable from black women. But where is he now? How he has survived is almost beyond any rational explanation. Earlier, I understood the alternatives of the black situation, assimilation, meaning acceptance of the oppressive contract, ossification, or life below, beyond, outside of society or revolution. But John, I admit, to some confusion over the issues of white racism growing out of my experience in prison. My mind has vacillated between the historical references, African feudalism and African communalism. I know that we Africans were the first communist. J. Edgar Hoover calls it the quote unquote P communism, primitive. I'm not gonna say anymore. And in one of the glossaries of his anti-people's book, Dr. Du Bois dealt with it in the Philadelphia Black Person. They used the N-word, I think. I can't quite remember it now in a positive matter, so I never had any of the really serious hangups in accepting revolution. But I think for a while I sincerely felt that Europeans were not capable of communistic Unitarian behavior. I felt this, however, only briefly, since Unitarian progressive conduct seems to be a problem for all of us after hundreds of years of steadily centralizing capitalism and, in some areas, after thousands of years of hierarchies. I've always understood that the new central nationalist attempts to return to the pre-slavery past of African feudalism can only leave the average black man more uncertain and insecure than ever. It is difficult to understand why such negative academic and obscured exoticism exists when there are definite examples of historical contributions which could be used to analyze the given meaning of our present and our future. The commitment to total revolution must involve an analysis of both the economic motives and the psychosocial motives, which perpetuate the oppressive contract. For the black partisan, national structures are quite simply non-existent. A people without collective consciousness that transcend national boundaries, Afro-Americans, black people, even Americans, without the sense of a large community than their own group, can have no effect on history. Ultimately, they will simply be eliminated from the scene. Without collective sense of community, without its movement, Bobby Hutton, the shootout on Central, August 7th, and the institutions or survival projects that will now grow into infrastructures. We simply never will be an effective force. All right, down here it says, 3 instances of armed black resistance. Little Bobby Hutton and was killed in the aftermath of the prolonged shootout with the Oakland police that involved Eldridge Cleaver. Hutton was shot and killed shortly after emerging from the basement of the house to surrender, naked as the police had demanded, and with both of his hands in the air. Police claimed they shot him when he attempted to escape. The shootout on Central is described in the previous notes. The significance of August 7th is described in the introduction. All right, let's go back up. During the nationalist period.
The next one was also part of that paragraph. Our survival projects.
Okay, thank you. The new programs of the Black Panther Party, which includes free medical clinics, breakfast programs, cooperative factories, housing, liberation schools, and prison projects. During the nationalist period of the collective oppressive mentality promoted by the establishment, the movement is frozen static. This is the level of development favored by the oppressors. The artless, empty ideas of the pseudo-nation, love and respect for the flag, nationalistic songs, or beat the fervent belief of a bond of organization which arises out of the thwarted longing for real community. The establishment does everything in its power to ensure the revolutionary wage is redirected into empty outlets which provide pressure release for the desire that could become dangerous if allowed to progress. At this stage in the development of monopoly capitalism, there are two alternatives: aggressive revolutionary activities or calcification. Conservative societies, black or white, is decadent society. Due to the absence of creativity and movement, conservative societies always burn itself out. Your letter got right at the heart of that principle. The whole deal of cultural nationalism has been all but smothered now. It was basically contrived out of the loss of community and the terms of the oppressive contract, coercive conformity, and indulgent flexibility to the demands of hierarchy. But we must all realize that the oppressive contrast cannot be broken as long as any sort of hierarchies exist to perpetuate the sensitized relationships of American tribalism, classism, and racism. Society is rendered impossible by such relationships. The establishment of society through the intercommunalism will require that this social contract be completely altered. Now under here it says Huey P. Newton's concept of revolutionary solidarity of all the oppressed peoples of the world. Sweet. Clearly, alterations cannot be placed unless hierarchies is destroyed. We cannot accept the hierarchy to do away with itself. When the real undertake at present is the unconditional freeing of the people. We plunge beyond ideological debates before this immediate task. The black man and the black woman must be, as I have mentally ordered things, completely joined together in the act of liberation. I accept that black mamas, with all her fears for my life that border on wildness at times. But I also realize that it is the, quote, role of the living, end quote, of all the innocents to discover unitary practice and conduct the move against the institutions that close on the oppressed. Those who have more regard for their own egos or self-interest than they have for building a united progressive left, and those who abandon community altogether in favor of petite interests are in direct opposition to our real interest. Hold on a second, I'm gonna see how. All right, we're getting to there. I might as well just finish the whole book. They are attempting another form of escapism. They're fleeing the objective conditions of their real life and will eventually reach the ultimate contradictions of facing their fathers or brothers or old classmates, comrades, or wives over the barrel of the gun. Or they will find themselves in no man's land, cast out by the people, suspected by their crimes partners. And under here it says, a prison ergot, a man's most trusted companion. All right. But regarding the crisis just passed in the party, as Huey Newton reminds us, there is always a positive side to each negative. And the departure from Black Panther parties of Eldridge Cleaver and some of his followers in Algeria and New York. Okay. The confused resentment and the revised racism of the black partisan can eventually lead to a new, more productive and creative contribution. Already we realize that there is no split in the party, only a defection. The party has come out of it stronger. We can now bring our strategy and tactics into a realistic conformity with our total objective situation. Recall we discussed, Jonathan, a guerrilla strategy in the urban situation at length over the piece of paper, over that piece of paper with circles and lines, arrows and question marks. I guess now that he is dead and the guilty are safe from the muscles of his mind and arms, it is safe to reveal some of his thoughts and functions within the matrix of the party and movement. He felt as I did that the military and political branches, though married in purpose and direction in these opening stages, should function separately from each other for very obvious reasons. In the undeveloped countries, the establishment military strike forces are not merely than 30 miles down a dirt road in the provincial capital. They're always within a few moments of strike. The urban guerrilla, however, can mingle with the enemy and remain invisible and invulnerable. In our present situation, there is no contradictions between the military thinking and the actions of primacy of politics. The situation allows for such activities as the August 7th movement because it can be accomplished without giving the enemy state forces the pretext they need to move in and destroy the political apparatus. Under the very convenient and much used Anglo-Saxon conspiracy laws, the primus of politics will continue as long as the military reads, picks up, and works well within the prevailing political matrix. So Jonathan raids on the military and judiciary that Friday was at once an repression of his own aggressive consciousness and that of the party. It is easy to infer all of this in retrospect that Jonathan was head of the clandestine army which saw the Black Panther Party as its political leader. Operating on his own, he was able to at least attempt to support some of the minimum demands of the people without placing Huey P. Newton, David Hilliard, in jeopardy of losing a movement or death, i.e. persecution in courts. This is our only recourse at the present level of the development is too obvious to even dwell on. It will not be possible, however, in the advanced stages of revolution. Just a glance at the present level of consciousness and the status of the survival infrastructure will reveal the errors of a Cleaver's analysis that no separation should exist even now between military and political cadres, between military and political action. You know, I sent him a message suggesting that Unitarian conduct depends on the principled discipline and submission of a democratic centralism instead of the egoism that sent him first against his Muslims through the Sacramento Bee Pig press that time, then against the Peace and Freedom Party, even against the progressive elements of the CP, through his unreasoned attacks on the magnificent Angela Davis. Recently, he has even attacked the dedicated, overworked, and brilliant Charles Gary. It seems to be a pattern with the man. You recall the attack he launched against Fidel and Cuba, and those accounts that seemed disparaging of his host, which have reached the pig press here from time to time. My personal message to him was mild. Consider that he was in fact leaving his old comrades open to attack again. I sent the letter reminding him that his behavior while in prison was far from exemplary and had the section of its assigned by Ulysses McDaniel and Clifford Jefferson, two of the oldest time in and most respected black partisans in the California concentration camp system, which is the prison system. I then listed some of his behavior patterns since his release, and more complete list than the one just given that did not indicate that he had changed much. I finally asked him simply to show proof now that he was not a compulsive disruptor or agent provocateur. A very mild request, I feel. He returned with a very scrupulous, circulous, I don't know what that word is. I don't know what the word is. Nope. Probably gonna finish the book. I might have to go over everybody just a bit. There it is. There we go. Let's hear this. Scurrilous. Making or spreading scandalous claims about someone with intention of damaging their reputation. All right, and that was scurrilous and profane set of invectives, in short, a piece of vendetta. Tell him that 7,000 miles, the walls of prison, steel, and barbed wire do not make him safe from my special brand of discipline. Tell him that the dragon is coming. Ooh, this talking about Eldridge Cleaver, I think. Yeah, hello. The substructure prison movement are gaining momentum. My trial is set for early August 1971. There will be a hearing in between, of course. If they are at all like the last, you'll get to see my special bastardized style of martial arts. I'm working hard to stay in form. I wasn't at my best at the last showing. I'll clean them all next time they attack. Attend. Let me see your style. Your comrade in arms, quote, he who does not fear the death of 1,000 cuts will dare unseat the emperor. This was the hearing of April 6, 1971. All right, afterwards. This is the last, and this is a good part. This is good because here we go. Afterwards, statement by, and this is the last page, and then we're done. We're going a little bit over. Statement by Huey P. Newton, servant of the people, Black Panther Party, at the Revolutionary Memorial Service for George Jackson. So this is after George Jackson was unalive. Not after, but. Power to the people. Power to the fallen comrades, Brother George Jackson, member of the Black Panther Party. First, because many people are wondering, I would like to explain the connection between Brother George Jackson and the Black Panther Party. When I went to prison in 1967, I met George, not physically, but through his ideas, his thoughts and words. He was at Soledad prison at the time. I was in California Penal Colony. George was a legendary figure throughout the prison system, where he spent most of his life. I met George through his spirit. Shortly after learning about him, I got word through the prison grapevine that he wanted to join the Black Panther Party. At his request, he was made a member of the People's Revolutionary Army with the rank of general and field marshal. He was put in charge of the prison recruiting and was asked to go on with his life as a revolutionary example, which was the most important thing that one can ever do, because that cannot be killed. I say that the legendary figure is also a hero. George Jackson is my hero. He set a standard for prisoners, political prisoners, for people. He showed the love, the strength, the revolutionary spirit the revolutionary fervor that's characteristic of any soldiers for the people. He inspired prisoners, whom I later encountered to put his ideas into practice, and so his spirit became a living thing. Today I say that although George's body has fallen, his spirit goes on, because his ideas live, and we will see that these ideas stay alive, because they'll be manifested in our bodies and in these young panther bodies, who are our children. So it's a true saying that there will be revolution from one generation to the next. This was George's legacy, and he will go on. He will go on into immortality, because we believe that the people will win. We know the people will win as they advance generations upon generations. What kind of standard did George Jackson set? First, he was a strong man without fear, determined, full of love, strength, and dedication to the people's cause. He lived a life that we must praise. No matter how he was oppressed, no matter how wrongly he was done, he still kept the love for the people. And this is why he felt no pain in giving up his life for the people's cause. The state itself sets the stage for the kind of contradictions or violence that occurs in our world, particularly in the prisons. The ruling circles of the United States has terrorized the world. The state has the audacity to say they have the right to kill. They say they have the death penalty, and it's legal. Sorry, but I say, by the law of nature, that no death penalty can be legal. It's only cold-blooded murder. It spurs all sorts of violence, because every man has a contract with himself to keep himself alive at all costs. Legally, the state can only confine someone subject to correction at a later date. Even if the state does wrong, it could give itself the semblance of legality by leaving open the possibilities of rectification. But of course, with the death penalty, with the kind of violence that we see in our communities, where the police are also the executioners, we don't have this chance of negotiation. They have the audacity to say that people should deliver a life to them without a struggle. None of us can accept that. George Jackson had every right to do everything possible to preserve his life and the life of his comrades, the life of the people. After his death, George Jackson is a legendary figure and a hero. Even the oppressors realize this. To cover this murder, they say that George Jackson killed 5 people, 5 oppressors, and wounded 3 in the space of 30 seconds. You know, sometimes I like to overlook the fact that this would be physically impossible. But after all, George Jackson is my hero, and I would like to think that it was possible. I would be very happy thinking that George Jackson had the strength, because that would have made him Superman. Of course, my hero would have to be a Superman, and we will raise our children to be like George Jackson, to live like George Jackson, to fight for freedom as George Jackson fought for freedom. George's last statement, the example of his conduct in San Quentin on that terrible day, left a standard for political prisoners and for the prisoner society of racist, reactionary America. He felt the standard for the liberation armies of the world. He showed us how to act. He demonstrated how the unjust would be criticized by the weapon. And this will certainly be true, because the people will take care of that. George also said once that the oppressor is very strong, and he might beat him down, he might beat us down, or to our very knees. He might crush us to the ground, but it will be physically impossible for the oppressor to go on. At some point, his legs will get tired. And when his legs get tired, then George Jackson and the people will tear his knees off. But first, the state sets the scene for such violence, you see. And some people say that we cannot get rid of this kind of physical conflict with more of the same. Well, I would take issue with this. We can use that example of the oppressor stomping George Jackson down to his knees. He can't go on. We will retaliate with violence against his violence. It's true that it is true that we'll be hurt by his violence, but we're determined not to let him wipe out the people. We know that he cannot wipe out the people because we will fight on. We will tear his legs off. We will tear his head off. We will take the examples from George Jackson in the name of love and in the name of freedom. With love as our guide, we will slit every throat of everyone who threatens the life of our children. We'll do it in the name of peace. If this is what we are forced to do, because as soon as it is over, then we can have the kind of world where violence will no longer exist. So we will be very practical. We won't make statements and believe the things the prison officials say. They're incredible stories about one man killing 5 people in 30 seconds. We will go on and live very realistically. There will be pain and much suffering in order for us to develop. But even in our suffering, I see a strength growing. I see the example of that George set living on. We know that all of us will die someday, but we know that there are 2 kinds of death: the reactionary death and the revolutionary death. One death is significant and the other is not. George certainly died in a significant way, and his death will be very heavy, while the deaths of the ones that felt that day in San Quentin will be lighter than will be lighter than the feather. Even those who support them now will not support them in the future, because we're determined to change their minds. We'll change their minds, or else, in the people's name, we'll have to wipe them out thoroughly, wholly, absolutely, and completely. All power to the people. The end. That was good. That's good. Yep, George Jackson will live on. This book will live on. I will keep reading this book forever and ever until the pages fall out and are ripped to pieces. Until I have to buy a new one. I will continue to read it over and over again. I think it's important. But anyways, I am done reading. I appreciate everybody coming in, coming through, staying for a little bit, maybe. I have no idea why you dropped. I didn't realize you dropped until I came on. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. It's not me. It was them. It was them. That's all George Jackson. Maybe TikTok. I didn't drop you. I promise. I promise. But yeah, I think I'm gonna go and handle Rufus and stuff like that. So let's see who's all in here. Oops. Sorry. Yep. Okay, everybody. Well, enjoy your evening. Hopefully you all had a good hope you all have a good evening and have a good weekend. Please take care of yourself. Tomorrow we'll start a new book called Free the Land. One of my comrades that I'm with here gave me that reading to read. So I'm going to read it to everybody else. Why I learned myself. So, all right. Wish you all the best. Have a good night.